Welcome to Idlewild Cottage, a quiet place where kindred spirits can linger together over a cup of tea, savoring all things lovely and cozy. My name is Juliana, and I'm delighted to have you. Each episode here at the cottage will center around a theme. That theme will be celebrated in a number of ways, through literature, art, nature, and even some favorite movie scenes. We'll cherish the sweet and simple things of life. So make yourself at home, and I'll put the kettle on. For the past couple of episodes, we've soared and sailed, slipped and skated over snowy and icy landscapes. This week, we'll take a few minutes to come in out of the cold and cozily tuck ourselves indoors. Our literary and cinematic friends will do the same. This episode is what I like to call a wee cuppa. It will be a bit shorter than a full-length episode, but will still carry the warmth and nostalgia that I hope is characteristic of this space. Let's imagine we've just been out in the snowy, wintry world surrounding Idlewild Cottage. Our sleigh is merrily filled with laughter and song as we pull up to the cottage steps and pile out. Discarding muffs and mittens, caps and scarves in the entryway, we make our way to the parlor and sink into soft, fluffy chairs. A fire crackles and snaps as we pass around teacups and scones and slip cozily into our first literary scene. Anne Shirley and Miss Lavender Lewis set the standard for a wintry evening shared with kindred spirits in Ella Montgomery's Anne of Avonlea. Anne keenly enjoyed her walk through the great gray maze of the beech woods. She traversed the woods and arrived at the fir lane just as broad, feathery flakes began to flutter down softly. At the first bend, she came upon Miss Lavender, standing under a big, broad-branching fir. "I thought you would come tonight, Anne," said Miss Lavender, running forward. "We're going to have a jolly evening. What do you want for tea? We'll have whatever you like. Do think of something nice and indigestible." There were sounds of riot and mirth in the little stone house that night. What with cooking and feasting and making candy, it is quite true that Miss Lavender and Anne comported themselves in a fashion entirely unsuited to the dignity of a spinster of 45 and a sedate schoolma'am of 17. We can just imagine a house filled with riotous mirth wherever the Ingalls family is gathered as well. Throughout her books, Laura Ingalls Wilder consistently draws us into the warm hearthside scenes. Last week found us by the shores of Silver Lake, where Laura and Carrie slipped and skated on the dark, smooth ice. This week, we'll bring the girls back indoors. Those were glorious days when they were out in the glitter of the sharp cold. Then it was good to come into the warm, close house, and good to eat supper. After supper, they all gathered in the warmth of the stove. Ma rocked Grace slowly to and fro, and Laura brought Pa the fiddle box. Pa's fiddle twinkled short little notes, and he sang. Then he showed Laura and Carrie how to hold hands and step to the tune of a polka. Pa played the polka, and they danced while he sang. Faster and faster he played, and faster they danced, till they were breathless and hot with dancing and laughing. If the Ingalls home is whirling with glee, another home is much more calm, though as snug as ever. A visit to this home, however, will call more strongly upon our imaginations, for these friends find warmth and rest in a snowbank. Ratty and Mole are forlornly navigating the wild, snowy wood in Kenneth Graham's The Wind in the Willows. Miraculously and gratefully, they stumble upon the home of Mr. Badger. The two animals tumbled over each other in their eagerness to get inside and heard the door shut behind them with great joy and relief. The badger looked kindly down on them and patted both their heads. "This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out," he said paternally. "Come along, come into the kitchen. There's a first-rate fire there, and supper and everything." The kindly badger thrust them down on a settle to toast themselves at the fire and bade them remove their wet coats and boots. In the embracing light and warmth, warm and dry at last, with weary legs propped up in front of them and the suggestive clink of plates being arranged on the table behind, it seemed to the storm-driven animals, now in safe anchorage, that the cold and trackless wild wood was miles away in a half-forgotten dream. Storm-driven animals are very much a part of James Herriot's reality in his charming All Creatures Great and Small books. Several of his tales have been adapted for children, and the story of Moses the kitten was one that my kids especially enjoyed. This story begins when the vet steps out of his car in the frigid winter air to open a farm gate as he winds his way through the dales. I noticed something unusual. There was a frozen pond just off the path, and among the rime-covered rushes, a small object stood out, shiny black. I went over and looked closer. It was a tiny kitten, huddled and immobile. Quickly, I lifted the little creature and tucked it inside my coat. We read that Harriet drives into the farmyard and calls out to the farmer, "I've got one of your kittens here, Mr. Butler." Mr. Butler is puzzled. They don't have kittens at the farm, and the men can't imagine where this one might have come from. Nonetheless, the farmer takes the kitten, engulfing it with his big, work-roughed hands, and brings him inside the house. We pick up the story. In the farm kitchen, Mrs. Butler was all concern. She smoothed back the bedraggled hair and prepared to go to work. "I'll get some warm milk into him, but first of all, we'll give him the old cure." She went over to the fireside oven on the big black kitchen range, opened the door, and popped him inside. Harriet smilingly notes that this was a classical procedure which often revived newborn lambs who were suffering from cold and exposure. Well, the treatment eventually revives this little fellow too. The Butlers promptly adopt the orphan, giving him the name Moses, as he was rescued from among the rushes. Finally, our movie of the week features another couple who tenderly welcomes both animals and children into their growing home. Cary Grant and Betsy Drake have 3 biological children, but their hearts yearn to also provide warmth, love, and guidance for 2 foster children in the heartwarming 1952 story, Room for One More. Both figuratively and literally, the Rose family invites Jane and Jimmy John to come in from the cold and be a part of their family. One scene is particularly moving. Jimmy John is determined to earn his Eagle Scout badge. This requires a difficult hike through the snowy winter landscape, a hike made all the more challenging because Jimmy John wears leg braces. With grit and determination, Jimmy John braves the storm, and his welcome home is warm and proud as his family gathers around him, administering massages and hot soup while chattering merrily about the adventure. Well, kindred spirits, I hear those sleigh bells jingling once again. It's time to head off to our respective homes. I hope our time together today has provided the warm feeling of friends or family gathered in joy and rest. I'm reminded of Psalm 91:4, in which we see the imagery of the Lord's protective covering, just as the bird protects her young. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and protection. Have a merry sleigh ride home, dear ones. Keep that buffalo robe wrapped snugly around, grab a scone for the road, and do come again soon to Idlewild Cottage.